So one of like the basic readings into the rebuild of Evangelion is that Rebuild is actively destroying Evangelion. It's doing everything in its power to not be Evangelion. I'm reading this off a script, which is why it's going to sound kind of robotic, and I'm just clicking around through Eva here at different points in the movie. The Rebuild is trying everything in its power to not be Evangelion, and as the movies progress, it becomes increasingly obvious that the meta statements in the dialogue and the visual symbolism all speak to wanting to destroy Evangelion fundamentally. The movies eventually become a symbolic battle, very literally a battle, between characters that want Evangelion to be Evangelion and characters that want to just destroy Evangelion. And then the characters are literally placed in reality, as close to reality as you could possibly get, as photorealistic as you could possibly get, which is the absolute opposite of the end of Evangelion, which goes out of its way to state that Evangelion is eternal. Like, as long as Evangelion exists, then humanity will have a symbol forever of their existence. But this movie instead ends saying, no, we don't need Evangelion to be human. Which is neat. And I wanted to say all this basically just to establish that Evangelion, the series, the mecha, the fictional universe, the word Evangelion represents a state of being. It all represents a state of being, and there's a lot to unpack to what that state of being is, whether you tie it to the psychological disorders that all the characters have, or escapism, like Evangelion's about escapism and rejecting reality, or whatever you've interpreted Evangelion to be. What's important, what I'm just trying to say, it doesn't matter what Evangelion exactly is, what I'm trying to say is that Rebuild is building up and then ultimately rejecting Evangelion. That's what's happening on screen. Anyway, it's interesting to see Asuka act all high and mighty in her new position in Ville as sort of the deterrence against Nerve. She says, like, oh, I'm protecting the village. Which Nerve represents old Evangelion and Ville represents like the newer, or the rejection of Evangelion. But it's funny because she's basically exactly as she was in 2.0. Like, she hasn't changed. She pretends that she's changed, but she really hasn't. Like, she's basically, her mind is still stuck in 2015, and I don't think that she's rejecting Evangelion like the other classmate characters have. Asuka still sees Shinji as a child.
That child doesn't need a lover. He needs a mother.
Changed a bit. I guess you're more grown up.
Give me a break. This brat doesn't change so easily.
And that's super ironic, because he's actually changed more than her.
I did nothing to escape responsibility.
Well, I see you've matured a little. I've grown into an adult ahead of you.
So Asuka still sees Shinji as a child who still needs his mother, despite other characters recognizing that it isn't true. If anything, she's projecting. It's funny, she doesn't eat properly. Like, she makes it a big deal. Where is it here? So she doesn't eat properly, she only has like water, and they explain it that like, oh, she's doing it because like, it's tied to the Eva or some shit like that. But like, again, it's just her continually tied to Eva. She's not rejecting Evangelion like the other characters are. She still just plays video games all day, which is how she was in 2.0. She continues to blame Shinji for her problems. Despite the outcomes of 2.0, like, nothing was really Shinji's fault. And even when, like, she, like, confronts him about it in this movie, like, he ultimately just says, like, oh, you're just unhappy that I didn't do anything. He didn't do anything to begin with, so why is she so upset? Like, I kind of get it, but also I think, like, after 15 years, she should be able to move on, but she doesn't, because she just lives in the past. Anyway, it's interesting because Shinji goes through this massive arc in this movie, where he starts out pretty depressed, but then ultimately he chooses to live. He eventually chooses to basically be human. And when he is human, he's rejecting Evangelion. He's not even dressed as he was in Evangelion anymore for like the first time, because you rarely ever see him in a different outfit.
Your father's still alive, right? Even if you think it's a waste of time, you should sit down and have a good talk with him. You'll regret it if you don't.
We're talking about Gendo Ikari. It's too tough for him.
Yeah, still. Father and son. The ties will always be there.
Like, it's just interesting to see Asuka be like, no, you can't, because this is Evangelion, they can never talk. And then, ironically, the movie ends with them talking. They could never talk it out, because again, she's just living in the past, and she's all like, oh, Evangelion has strict rules to it, but Shinji is trying to destroy those rules and say, no, actually, maybe we can talk it out. And so, first we see Shinji reject Evangelion previously, fundamentally, and he chooses to live and be human. After that, he decides, hey, let's make things right with my dad. And it's sort of Shinji's final mission in this series. If he can fix his relationship with his father, he'd fully reject Evangelion fundamentally to the core forever. Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. And then he does that with all the characters. He's like, hey, you don't have to be an Evangelion, guys. You don't have to keep living clinging to the past. You can be free and you can do whatever the hell you want with your life.
Let's go.